it. And we're not going to stop it. Of course we're not going to stop it. Headingley finishes it off.
Jack Bird with his first Leeds try.
It's a huge Friday clash in the Betfred Super League Round 16 as Leeds Rhinos prepare to take on Hawkhead later today in the MND Awareness Game. The club's MND Awareness Round, always one of the highlight matches of a Super League season here at AMT Headingley, and we are here on Matchday Live, bringing you all the insight, all the analysis before the teams run out in little over 2.5 hours time or so. Pleasure to have your company. I'm Dan Hawkhead. Great to have you on Matchday Live yet again, and joining me as usual is BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon. Jack, there's only one place to start coming into such a big game. We picked up last week's game against Warrington being the highlight game of the Super League season, and the Rhinos just dominated, blew Warrington out of the park. A really great result for Brad Arthur's side.
They were so good. They were so good. You're right in touching on it. We thought that game would be so close, given the form of the two sides. You know, Leeds and Warrington, top two. And by 4 points, separating them two from that chasing pack. He highlighted just how big a result it'd be mentally as well. Whoever came out on top, giving that psychological advantage of an extra couple of points and a little bit of clearance at the top of the table. And yeah, we were expecting a really tight contest, but it was the complete opposite. Leeds were so good. One of the finest performances of the season, I think you can probably call it. There's a good 2 or 3 that you could chuck up there. One of them being the Vegas game, which I know we're going to come on to, given who they play this weekend. The win here at AMT Headingley against Warrington as well is another one, but they were just so good. Warrington just could not keep up with the pace. I think that certainly for a good 65 minutes or so is almost the blueprint for this Leeds Rhinos side of what we want to see when it comes to the entertainment value and the successful rugby as well. The way they were playing was just so effective, but so easy on the eye too. Some of the offloading game was great to watch. A lot of late offloads that really caught Warrington on the back foot. The pace of the game, I thought, was really important. Leeds dictated that throughout. Lockie Miller being back in, he was like an Energizer Bunny out there. He was so on it constantly.
But that's where it starts, isn't it? Is by having someone like, I know that we've talked in the lead up to that show that Fergus McCormack is such a different player to Lockie Miller, but that's where that pace comes from, isn't it? Just that he can pick up a ball by the time he's running back at the line. Almost it sets the precedent for what that centre's going to look like, doesn't it?
He struck me as a player who, when you watched him last week against Warrington, he looked like a player who had been itching to get out on the field for 3 weeks. All the way through that suspension, he was just so desperate to be involved in everything. I think Brad Arthur sort of alluded to it after the game that he spoke to him at half time and sort of said that in that first half that he was maybe doing a bit too much at times. And by that, he sort of means he was taking more energy out of himself, doing jobs that weren't necessarily his. But I think that is just a sign of a player who was eager to be back involved. And I mean, what impact he had as well. He was such a tough player to deal with, as has been the case throughout this season. And yeah, I mean, you could pick through that entire Rhinos side, and go through each individual that played in that game against Warrington and highlight what they did well. There were so many impressive performances. I thought Connor and Croft were again just fantastic, linking up with Miller. Mike Acevo, obviously his try-scoring exploits just continued to dazzle. I think there was a lot of people, particularly after that game, sort of pointing to the fact that he may end up at the very least pushing Dennis Solomona's Super League try-scoring
He's ahead
record
of him
close.
now.
Well, that's what I mean, yeah, in comparison to where Solomona was, albeit Solomona's was in a year where there was 3 extra games in the season, so that might not end up even being a factor with how Sivo's getting on. Handley, again, was just fantastic. The middle forwards, Oledsky and Jenkins, I thought, in particular, were great. There were so many brilliant individual performances, but as a collection, as a team, yeah, they were just second to none. They were poles apart with Leeds and Warrington last week,
and it's no surprise. I think I've said that we've not talked about it enough this year. I think there were points, and you brought them up there, and I think watching it from both at home and then being at the ground, it was a great support over there at Warrington. Thank you to everybody that did go across the Halliwell Jones. None of them are surprised. We said how promising this forward pack would look like, and it's doing the job we expected. We said that both whether it's Danny Levi that starts, whether it's Jared O'Connor that starts, what that'll look like in terms of Danny Levi with a bit more pace, Jared wanting to hit players out there. We've said in the past about how good the half combinations are and the outside backs. None of it is a surprise that we're playing as well as we are. I think it's not a surprise, but it's how consistently week in, week out we're doing it at the minute.
Exactly, and I think that again comes down to the fact that once again, Brad Arthur was able to name the same 17. And I mean, we'll talk about the 21-man squads shortly. It looks like there's going to be one change going into this week, but that's not as a result of anyone being injured. That's someone coming back. And that has just been so beneficial for Leeds. You look across the league and just about every team has had some significant injury issues, even those that are in that top 6. I mean, Warrington have ended up with, blooding a lot of young kids this season. Wigan have obviously spent time without French and Field. St Helens have had their own dramas. Wakefield are probably in the midst of their worst period of injuries since they've been back in Super League. You could pick through every team and look at where those injuries lie and see that there have been periods of this season that they've had affected. And I think if you look back on this season so far, Leeds' worst game in terms of unavailable personnel was probably the opening game at Lee. And since then, it's been pretty smooth sailing in that regard. And I mean, there's an element of luck there, without a doubt, as is always the case with injuries. But again, I think we've said it on previous Matchday live shows that you've got to give a lot of credit then to the conditioning staff and the medical staff for keeping those players ticking along and keeping them in tip-top shape. And I know Brad Arthur has been quick to highlight that as well at certain press conferences, when asked about just the I guess the dilemma of who to pick, but also the fact that he's got so many fit options to pick from. So yeah, I think that's been a massive factor again, has just been that consistency in keeping the same players on the field, keeping those same combinations, and it's working absolute wonders.
It's doing absolute wonders. But I think a team that rivals Leeds for potentially having personnel on the field, ironically with a few missing this week, is Hull KR. Now, plenty happening at Sewell Group Craven Park this week and in the sort of weeks previous. We've not done a Hull KR show for this. Bear in mind that we were in Vegas last time and we didn't quite have the budget to take Matchday live on the road, but with a proper chance to deep dive into Hull KR and really take a look, and we've had the opportunity to look at Warrington twice already this year. Hull KR is a brand new team on Matchday Live. So much is happening, like I say, led more by that. You've got Nathan Kalis as a new head coach. Willie Peters was confirmed as sort of out the door quite a few months ago, going to obviously the PNG Chiefs. But in Kalis, it's interesting that they've gone down the route again of someone who's not a traditional head coach. I'm not going to question his experience because you look at his resume, he's got 300 NRL games with Parramatta, he's got countless caps for New Zealand, he's a man who has played at the highest possible level that he can in his career, but as a coach, he's been at the Eels in their reserves, but he's one of those assistant coaches that they're really hoping could follow Willie Peters' footprint in that they can then go on and lead ahead and go on and build themselves a head coach over here in Super League.
It's always a bit of a risk, isn't it, whenever a head coach is appointed, because there's no predicting. Yes, teams will do their due diligence when it comes to appointing people, but there's no guarantee as to how they are going to do. And I think that's very much what Hull KR will be walking into next season. Now they've got a head coach coming in, or a new head coach that, as you mentioned there, it's his first head coaching job. He's had a decent bit of experience as an assistant in Australia. I think he's been at 3 or 4 clubs throughout his coaching career. You mentioned his playing resume there. It's pretty impressive. I remember him captaining New Zealand to, I think I'm right in saying, a World Cup triumph, when back in his playing days. And he was always a formidable player, and, has seemingly got quite a decent run on the board as an assistant as well. So they, like I say, they will have done their due diligence. They will have asked around about Nathan Cayless. They would have, I imagine, asked around about other coaches as well, or other candidates that they had in mind, and have finally come to this decision. Hull KR, and I think on the back of the Willie Peters appointment, there will be a degree of confidence among their fans that this is the right move. There will be a trust there in those that have made this decision and have made that appointment. Just again on the back of what Willie Peters has done, having been a relatively unknown quantity when he first walked in the door at Craven Park. So it's a big act to follow. I don't think there's any shine away from that. Willie Peters has been an absolute revelation at Hull KR, hence why now he's ended up with this NRL move to the PNG Chiefs to spearhead their first season in the competition in a couple of years' time. So yeah, it will be a big loss, but I think that's sort of a natural progression for a head coach, and their hope will certainly be in Nathan Cayless. They've got someone who can follow that similar path probably. How long-term they are looking at him as a head coach is a different question, because probably in a similar sort of mould to Willie Peters, he will want to, as a assistant coming into his first head coaching job, he'll want to make that impression, and probably has an NRL move in the back of his mind at some point, further down the track. But, certainly if he can pick up where Willie Peters has left off, that will be the hope and the expectation, I think, from Hull KR. Then they won't go far wrong. But as I say, you never really know until he arrives, and until we're past a certain amount of games in 2027, you can properly get a real look at the impact that he's made there, or just what he's carried on, I guess.
I think it's such a big act. Not to totally echo what you just said, but it is such a big act to follow. Like, when you look back at even that first year that Willie Peters came in, semi-finalists in the playoffs. He's hit the playoffs every single year. You look at the treble last year. You look at the World Cup Challenge earlier this year.
Major trophies. He's been the man that has
it's what sums up your careers as a head coach, isn't it?
Without a doubt.
What trophies come into?
Without a doubt.
What trophies are put in the cabinet?
And you look at a side in Hull KR that until Willie Peters, did arrive and has delivered what he has done, they're certainly in recent history, as much as they have been a bit of an up and down club, and I think there's a lot that has gone into establishing them as a solid, not only Super League side, but title contenders in recent years. That's not just down to Willie Peters, that's due to the wider infrastructure and everything they put into that club. But you've got to credit Willie Peters with building a side and a mentality, a squad there that has delivered great things. So yeah, it will be a hard act to follow, but clearly, Hull KR have become a club that back these sorts of decisions and have been very sensible and reliable with those decisions in recent years. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does bring to Super League next season, Nathan Cayless.
Well, let's look at the here and now. So Hull KR come into today's game, third place in the table. Real different situation to where we saw them back at the start of the year, where they were losing by 1 point to York, where they were going to Catalan and suffering defeats, losing big in Vegas. Yes, today is the massive rematch of the Rhinos against the Robins after that big win for the Rhinos at Allegiant Stadium that we've alluded to. But you look at recent form, they've won 9 of the last 10 league games. They're up to 10 wins in total in 14 games. The season's not lost. Granted that it looked a little bit shaky at the start of the year. They're definitely back on track, and 2 wins last time out against York and Lee. Only conceding, I think it was 2 tries to Lee, but still in the single figures. They're back in the contest to say you will put them on the road to the grand final at least for the end of the year.
They've got the mojo back a little bit, I think. If you look a bit further back down the track, before the defeat in the Challenge Cup final, they won 9 games on the bounce in all comps, which again is just a sign of a side that at that particular time and through that period was confident in what they were doing. They had that momentum behind them, similar to how we've seen Leeds play at times this season, where there is just such an energy and a feel-good factor about them that they are so tough to beat. And I think that was Hull KR. Now, that Challenge Cup final obviously knocked them down a peg, and they lost to Wakefield the week after. But since then, in those 2 games, as you mentioned, against York, who I mean, as we've seen in recent weeks, have sort of tailed off after that start to the season they had, which is probably a result of injuries and squad depth, and that in itself is a totally different conversation. But that was an ideal game probably for Hull KR to just get themselves back on the horse, and then a tougher challenge against Lee last week, but again one that they came through relatively comfortably. Lee caused them a couple of problems here or there, but I think you always had KR really as the favourites in that, and so it proved. But I think this week for them is a much bigger challenge, again in part just because of how good Leeds were against Warrington. Leeds coming off the back of some really impressive results as well. Let's not forget Saints 3 weeks ago.
Indeed.
The Toulouse game, which was a different sort of challenge, but one that they got over the line in the end, despite that bit of adversity in the middle of the game, conceding those tries. But yeah, I think it'll be a much tougher challenge for Hull KR to come to Headingley and face a side that the top of the league, and I think most people would have down as favourites for certainly the grand final. We're still well away. We're a few months yet from the playoffs, obviously. So you can never properly make those predictions just yet, but I think when you look at how every side in Super League is trending, Leeds have probably been the one that have been on the most even keel throughout. Yes, they've had a couple of bits of adversity, the Wigan game, the Hull game, which seems a distant memory now, which I know we brought up a few times actually on Matchday Live when it comes to just talking about the form in this Leeds team. But Wigan probably being the biggest one that you'd point to and the biggest challenge that they will still have to overcome before anyone even thinks about the playoffs. I think Leeds have just been a bit more of a different juggernaut this season, and one that KR will really struggle to handle at Headingley as well. Let's not forget on what is looking like potentially another really warm evening, like it was at Warrington last week. I think the conditions, by the way, I want to touch on that in that Warrington game, really benefited Leeds for that running rugby, that expansive rugby. I think it suited Leeds down to the ground, and they played those conditions perfectly. May well be the same this time around. There's possible forecast of storms as we reach the end of this sort of hot period. So we'll see how that sort of affects things. But I think if it is warm weather rugby, it will really benefit Leeds. Now KR do well in those conditions as well, again just because of the personnel they've got. But I think it will be a real challenge for them to overcome Leeds, albeit why wouldn't they back themselves, given that they are somewhat back on the horse after those back-to-back wins.
And of course, it's looking like the conditions like they've got the World Cup at the minute over in America. I'm gonna ask the question: do you think that this game, which added to what you're saying about it being a warm weather game, is going to be an absolute packed crowd as well? We're expecting over 17,000. We're expecting it to be an emotional game as well. These MND Awareness games always are. But do you think this is a 6-pointer in that? Look at Leeds, so they'll open a 6-point gap to Hull KR in third place. Yes, they've got the game in hand against Warrington later in the year, but is this actually quite a defining game in the season for Leeds if they can build a 4-point buffer to Warrington and a 6-point buffer to Hull KR?
I think without a doubt, if they come away with a win out of this, the fact that in the past 4 weeks they will have beaten 3 of the teams that are in that, not just in the top 6, but when they played Saints were third. Obviously beat Warrington, who were in second, going into that game, and now against Hull KR, who are now in third going into this game. I think if you come away, or if Leeds come away from those games, having won all of them, I think that's a massive statement. I really, really do. Wigan, for me, are still the outliers there.
Yes.
And I think that goes without saying. I think if you're looking at form at the minute, Leeds and Wigan are the 2 best teams in the comp. But I think without a doubt, the fact that you've been able to get over the top, and in the manner they have as well. I mean, Saints was a tougher contest, really entertaining contest. But the tougher of those 2 games, if you're looking at the Saints and Warrington wins, Warrington was a surprise result, I think, to everyone, but one in which they really flexed their attacking muscles and showed what they can do as a side. I think even if it's a tight game against Hull KR and they come out on top, I think, again, that's a massive psychological boost. Like you say, when you look at the table, if you're looking at it on paper, the gap that then opens up between themselves and third, if we think they've sort of dipped a toe into the top 6 and securing the top 6 on the back of that Warrington win, that's probably a footing.
At least.
You'd say. So I think it's a massive step towards what they're wanting to get out of this season and what they're hoping to, or the position they're hoping to find themselves in come sort of September time. So I think it'd be a huge step in the right direction for Leeds.
And it's coming at a time when we've got some favourable fixtures. Looking at Bradford's coming up twice. You've got a trip to Catalan. You've got Casford in there, all winnable games.
I do just want to mention as well, you mentioned there, it's obviously the MND Awareness Game, which of course is such a poignant occasion. The first one without Jeff Burrow, of course, as well, which, it's always an emotional occasion anyway, is the MND Awareness Game, and it has been, since it was first done by the Rhinos, and obviously a club with such a close connection with the MND community, and I think certainly from a rugby league perspective, we've all been reminded of late just how cruel a disease it is. Absolutely. With the story of Jairo over in Australia, that is so sad. It's obviously a time to remember Rob Burrow, to remember Jeff as well. Those that were such tireless campaigners for MND awareness. Support those that are battling on with the disease in Stephen Darby.
Lewis Moody.
In Lewis Moody, of course, in Ed Slater, in Jairo, remembering the great Doddy Weir, of course, but also as well shining a light, as I think the club always do really well, on those that don't have the same platform. And I know whenever Kevin Sinfield does the challenges, the 7-in-7s, he always is very, very quick to point out that, yes, we are supporting these people who are in the public eye and who are fantastic sporting figures, but it's also an important moment to shine a light on those who are more so struggling in silence and who really don't, as I say, have that same platform, and just, give them the support as well. So, it's always a poignant occasion, isn't it? And I think this one will be no different. And
it's so different, I think, now looking 6 years down the line since Rob's diagnosis, since Kev first started doing the challenges, how much people now, I would hope, aren't suffering in silence and are definitely coming forward, and it's all part of getting behind and supporting the MND community. And we, the Rhinos, we always champion that, and we know there's some special pre-match plans that are in place to make sure you're at the stadium, to make sure that you can watch all of it. It's not to be missed. Look, some really exciting stuff in place. Squad news coming in this week. Not much to change between the two teams. We'll start with KR, run off the back of them. Just 2 changes for those guys. Ollie Gildak coming back in. He's missed last week's win against Lee. Kobe Wainhouse, it could be his first appearance of the year. Not too sure quite how that'll look with him coming into as a forward. Going out is Joe Burgess and Sam Luckley. How do you see that team changing and morphing from what we saw in the last 2 games?
I think there will be some change from that game last week, and when I say change, obviously there's personnel changes that will happen because there's no Joe Burgess. That's the big one, I think, for them. But also just with the composition, I think, of particularly their outside backs. Ollie Gildat is back in after completing his HIA protocols, which kept him out last week. So you'd imagine will slot straight into that left centre position. Reece Martin deputised there last week. Don't see him moving onto the wing. He may well drop.
That'd be a move for Reece.
It would, wouldn't it? He may well drop to the bench. Probably. Wouldn't be surprised to see Noah Booth come in on the left wing in Burgess' absence, which is a huge miss for them, by the way. We know just the natural threat that Burgess is on that left-hand side, whether it's finishing from close range or starting those sort of counter-attacks from distance. He's just got raw pace, hasn't he? So that'll be a big miss for them, I think. A couple of other players that are doubts are Jez Litton. Now, he missed their game against Lee, that win against Lee, and Suaso Su, who played, but is also a bit of a doubt. So Willie Peters possibly with a couple of late calls to make on players, which you probably say plays into the Rhinos' favour a bit, in that KR may be coming into this game, if not with a couple of bruised and battered bodies, then a couple of late changes that may cause a little bit of disruption. Now they're professional and top class team on their day, so they'll have dealt with stuff like this before, no doubt. And so that may not be as relevant as you may big it up to be, but I think of the two sides, Leeds are definitely the more settled coming into this one. I mean, Brad Arthur's already essentially revealed what his 17 is going to be, as he tends to do at his weekly press conferences, which I've got to say for members of the media is a breath of fresh air and always really helpful. So I mean, KR of the two, as I say, are going to experience the more disruption there and are going to be forced to make a couple of changes. So I think with the players that are missing, Sam Luckley being the other one, as you mentioned there, that drops out of the side. He packs a punch off the bench, so
Such
they may
a
have
great
to.
story. Sam
brilliant.
Luckley's rise is a great story. If you've
It's
not
fantastic.
looked at it, just find it somewhere.
Fantastic. He was always the poster boy for Magic Weekend, wasn't he? When he was up in Newcastle with that thick Geordie accent. So no, I agree. But he will be a miss for them off the bench because he does have that degree of punch. So it's they might have to find someone else to fill that role. Jordan Desiree is still in the squad. Kobe Wainhouse, like you mentioned, comes in, so he's an option as well. Tavita Pangai Jr. has been impressive in his first couple of games, which we'll come on to shortly, so he might be that man. Who knows? But yeah, there's a couple of big misses for Hull KR, certainly.
And then just one change for the Rhinos coming into this one. Riley Lump coming into the side. Fergus McCormack dropping out. Won't be surprised to see both those guys playing in the reserves game. That's available for you Rhinos TV Plus customers. On the other side of this finishing, join myself and scholarship player Ben Smith talking you through the next, through that game as Chev Walker's side start their second half of their season in such a massive game against Wigan. Will be a brilliant one to watch after this. But both those guys I'd expect to play in the reserves. He's basically said as well, hasn't he, Brad, that Presley Cassell and Jack Bird surprisingly will get a run out in a reserve shirt. But so it's rinse and repeat. We go again with the same 17. It feels like we're back in the middle of the first half of the year, naming the same starting 17.
Very much so. And the only question now is really who starts in the forwards, which is often the question. Brad Arthur.
Put a name on it, Jack. Come on.
You know what? I think he will go with the same starting forward pack as he did against Warrington. Okay. So I think the only change will literally come on the bench with Tom Holroyd replacing Presley Cassell. Big boost to have Holroyd back, I think. Before his injury, he was looking really bright, and he was an integral part of what has been, as I've already mentioned, a really strong forward pack this season. But yeah, I think again just a reminder of where this squad is at, and the culture, I guess, that and the ethos that Brad Arthur has instilled, in that if you win your place back, if you're still playing well enough, then you'll keep it. Hence why Jack Bird is finding himself in the reserves through I guess no fault of his own really, because when he's played this season, he's looked brilliant in that right centre spot. Fantastic. But Harry Newman gets his opportunity off the back of Bird's surgery, and Newman's been good enough to keep that place. So
it's hard to complain. I don't think
it is.
Yeah, Jack did play really well in that spell, but I think Harry in the last few weeks has just more than confirmed why he deserves that number 3 shirt at the minute.
100%, and who knows, further down the line this season there may be opportunities for Bird to come back in and replace someone and get his chance, and you'd imagine that he will take that with both hands because he strikes you as that type of player, doesn't he? But yeah, it's very much the message that no one's place in this squad is guaranteed. But if you find yourself in that 17 and you are playing well enough, then you will keep your place. And I think that's a very good mentality as a squad to have. I think that's a good culture to have around a club as well. Absolutely. And while Jack Bird, you'd imagine, what best pleased that he's playing reserves, he has clearly bought into that. He wouldn't have come over if that wasn't the case, if he was demanding to be playing every week. So it's just the same across the squad, isn't it? Players will find themselves in and out, and it's just literally a case that, again, there's no injuries off the back of last week, so it is rinse and repeat somewhat.
I'll be interested to see how Tom Holroyd goes as well. He's always a great impact, whether he's off the bench or whether he's starting. I wondered if we might see Cooper Jenkins as a starter, potentially, just catching him with that early bit of power and a little bit more speed. Not that Keenan doesn't do that, but then offers another option just for him to, whether it slots it loose forward. We'll have to see. I think I agree with you. It'll be more than likely the same. I think the positional group that we can lock down and say that these 4 players will play. This is our head-to-head. We've picked the halfbacks this week. That's not us copying out, but this is where this game's going to get won, is in these pairs. For the Leeds, on one side in the blue corner, not in the red corner, in the blue corner,
yeah, quite.
It's Jake Connor and Brodie Croft. In the red corner, it's Mikey Lewis and Tyrone Mate. They are exactly what makes their sides tick. We've waxed lyrical about Connor and Croft all season, but you're going to take us through, Jack, statistically, why these both are such a great matchup going head-to-head, and why it will be what turns this game in the position it will.
It all comes down to try involvements. And when I was looking this week, they are the pairs of halfbacks in Super League with the most try involvements. And the stats in themselves are really interesting. So combined, the Rhinos have scored 16 tries and 28 assists. That's Croft and Connor. KR through Lewis and May, 18 tries, 32 assists. Now, taking you through individually, Brodie Croft, 16 tries, 7 assists. Jake Connor, Yet to score a try, but 21 try assists, which is remarkable.
And a league best as well.
Exactly, a league best, yeah, good to point out. Mikey Lewis, 15 tries, 13 assists. Tyrone May, 3 tries and 19 assists. I mean, we could just literally leave it there because those numbers speak for themselves, but they are so consistent just in the way they play. And again, I guess the availability as well is another really key part. You know, those 4 players have had very few games out, if any. You know, I need to look back at who has been ever present or not. But yeah, there's not been many games that they've missed. And I think that is largely why these two teams have been as successful as they have. I think when any of those players are missing from their respective sides, you can tell the difference straight away. The way that they play and the way that they've created those partnerships now over a good, you know, depending which set you're looking at, over a couple of years.
Absolutely. It's not just this year, is it?
Exactly. I mean, Connor and Croft, there was a lot made of it in pre-season. It's their first pre-season properly as a combination. Now, they obviously played a good chunk of last season in those positions, but Matt Frawley was still in the mix there. Jake Connor was a bit of an unknown quantity coming into the Rhinos side as to where he was going to play, where he was going to fit, ended up making that scrum half position his own. But on the back of a full pre-season together, they look a completely different dynamic, so much better, so much more comfortable. May and Lewis have had a couple of seasons together and just look, again, top quality. You know, you don't win you're not a halfback pairing that wins the treble without having some real impact on what your side do. I think Tyrone May in particular this season has really grabbed that Hull KR bull by the horns and led that side from the front. And I think that as well has taken a bit of pressure off Mikey Lewis. He is obviously the talisman in that Hull KR side and has been for a couple of years, but I think having May as his foil and the player to, I guess, steer them around the park has just allowed Lewis to really play his natural game, and that is to just run and
so direct.
Oh, he's so direct. He's got such a turn of pace and a fantastic sidestep as well that he picks up that ball and just sees what's in front of him. If he spots a gap, he's got so much confidence to back himself and go for it. And I mean, 9 times out of 10 it comes off. And I think having May there to sort of just keep things ticking along again has just opened up a completely new dimension of Mikey Lewis. I think interestingly swapped the shirt numbers around, didn't they? A couple of seasons ago.
Yes.
I think May was 27 initially, Lewis was 7, and how much you read into squad numbers is a different sort of case, but I think traditionally the 7 is supposed to be your organiser, and your 6 is meant to be your runner who plays off the back of that, and they've got that combination down to a T now. So yeah, I think it's quite clear to see that those two halfback partnerships are really what make these two sides tick and are very much the difference makers in the respective lineups. So I think that's a really interesting battle. Now, if you look at the St Helens and the Warrington wins for Leeds, they were up against halves partnerships that were either a bit makeshift or very young.
They were fluctuating, weren't they?
They were. We talked about it ahead of the Saints game that we didn't know what they'd go with. They went with Whitby and Lomax in the end. Jackson Hastings in there. Tristan Saylor ended up on the wing. Jack Wellsby to fullback. So, I mean, Saints have been in a bit of disarray with their halves all season anyway. And then Warrington had Irwin and Hayes, who I think if you combine their ages, it's I think just shy of 40. So that tells you everything you need to know about where they're at. Two promising players, but not in the same category certainly at this point in time as a Connor and a Croft or a May and a Lewis. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting matchup, and that is where this game, in my opinion, will be won or lost. Is those halfbacks, who really takes the game by the scruff of the neck, who dominates, who organises better, who organises their team better, who puts on those plays, and gets that attack moving. That for me is where this will be won. And
you almost pair them head to head. It'd be interesting, just as a side note, if one of these or one each of these goes to the World Cup, goes with England. I'd be really interested in what a Mikey Lewis and Jake Connor halfback partnership looks like out there. I think that could spell brilliance. It absolutely could.
Well, that's another debate, isn't it? Because there's probably 4 halfbacks that are in that conversation, maybe 5 for what you'd imagine is 3 positions. And so that's George Williams, you'd bank on going because he's the captain. You're then left with 2 spots between Jake Connor, Mikey Lewis, Harry Smith, probably Jake Truman, who was the outside bet. But so there is an obvious if the way that both sides are going and the chance of a Super League title isn't enough of a motivation, the World Cup at the end of the season, from an individual standpoint, will be extra for a Connor and a Lewis. So yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic, and that in itself is an interesting sort of sub conversation. Is that race for an England spot? But I think that those 4 players as a group, as 2 on each side, are a really interesting battle for me this week.
We could absolutely take this deeper. As a note as well on Jake Connor, looking at his last 3 games, 8 assists is only levelled by Catalan's Lewis Dodd.
Yeah,
this is when he's coming into his own. I know Brad's said in post games, I can't remember which, it might have been Saints, where he said, I'm asking him to, it's Toulouse, where he said, I am saying to him, you can go and get more tries, if you see something, do it. But he's so unselfish, is Jake, that that's what he's putting himself on this year, is providing those tries, and whether it's a pass, whether it's a little dink kick that goes by the posts, he's got those, either option there nailed on.
I think what we're seeing from Jake Connor this season as well is a consistency. And I say this season, last season was the same, Man of Steel winner at the end of the day. Jake Connor's talent has never been in doubt throughout his entire career, whether that was starting out at Huddersfield, when he was at Hull, going back to Huddersfield. That has never been his issue. What has always been, I think, Jake Connor's problem is the consistency in that, and just delivering that skill every single week. He's found that at Leeds, and whether that is a product of the coaching he's getting under Brad Arthur, whether it's being trusted with that number 7 shirt and the responsibility he's got in the squad, whether it's his teammates, whether it's Croft alongside him and Miller, as an extra part of that trio, whether it's the forwards that are laying the platform, whether it is just the entire team structure, whatever Leeds are getting right, which is a lot of things at the minute, hence why the top of Super League. Jake Connor is absolutely benefiting, and has been benefiting now for a good year and a half since joining the Rhinos. There was so much talk when he did arrive at Headingley at the start of 2025 as to what he really would add. There were so many critics as well. I think from people who stand on the Headingley terraces, even when that was announced. But he's gone from strength to strength. He's proved everybody wrong, and he's continuing to do so. And he's just such a consistent threat now. And I think that is the real improvement. Is Jake Connor, is that he's delivering these top quality moments, pieces of play, be it from the boot or out of his hands, week in, week out. And that is in part, it's not the full story in Leeds' I'm not going to say success because they're not there yet, but in their form, there's so many aspects to it. But Jake Connor is definitely a huge cog in that machine. And
I think the blueprint from what Hull have done with Lewis and May over the years is, I'm not saying it's been replicated by Brad Arthur at all. I'm obviously not in those coaches' meetings, but I don't think it's ironic that Connor has taken on that Tyrone May style role of, I'll just marshal the troops around, and Brodie Croft to come off the back of it with 16 tries, much like Lewis is the one who's got 15 tries for KR with their directness. Focusing now on our key players to watch for this, and we've picked out our top 3 players from Hull KR that you need to keep an eye out for, one of which Rhinos fans will know very well from his time in the academy. He's a Leeds boy through and through, but Jack Broadbent is another player that, off the back of last year, you talk about players going from strength to strength, of really developing. There was a chance that if he'd have stayed at Cass, I wonder where his career would have gone, but he's at Hull KR and he's having probably the time of his life in that back line, and really taking advantage of the fact that, obviously it's sad for them that Arthur Morg's sidelined. Jack Broadbent is the man who's taken that number 1 shirt by both hands and gone, that fullback position is mine, and is so crucial as well to why May and Lewis work so well too.
I think he's a really valuable commodity to have for Hull KR, just when you look at his versatility now. He's probably had one of the most consistent runs of his career so far, I'd probably say this season, given, as you mentioned there, Arthur Morg's been out with a couple of injury spells, and Broadbent has very much been the next man up and is the next man up in their back line. That's why he's such a good player to have in a squad, in that he can fill in any of those backline roles and do a really good job. Even statistically this season, he's up there for carries and metres. I think he's in the top 5. I think for both, certainly for metres in Super League. So again, on the stats he's doing well, but even on the eye test, I think he's really found a home at fullback. And again, he's combining with May and Lewis well. And yeah, he's I remember when he came through at Leeds, and he was a talented player, obviously, ended up falling by the wayside a bit and was probably just nudged out because of other players that were in that position. Went to Cass, nailed down a starting spot for them and has ended up at Hull KR, and he's probably gone from strength to strength, you can say, in that KR side. So yeah, he's a really, really tidy player. Don't think he has the same impact if we're looking on the flip side as a Lockie Miller, for example, but will absolutely just do the job well, and adds a good, good bit of threat, I think, into that KR side. So yeah, he's turned himself into a top fullback this year, but will be a top centre or a top winger if asked of him.
Absolutely, or a top halfback if he's needed to drop in there. I know he played a little bit there for both coming through his academy and also for Leeds at points. Talking about that back line too for KR, you talk about Gildart coming back in. I think the experience of Hiku is going to be really big in this. He seems to be someone who, I remember him coming to Warrington a few years ago and really looked to be sort of the outskirts of the NRL, went back off the back of that and turned himself into a big player at North Queensland and at the Warriors. And he's, I would argue, one of those players that when they've always done smart business of Hull KR, we've talked about that, we've always skirted over it a little bit. When you look at the players that they brought in to go with Willie Peters, and Petter Hiku's been at the forefront of that with his experience. But when you look at whether he was brought over as a fullback initially, moving into those outside backs, it just solidifies up that left edge that whether it's Reece Martin, whether it's James Batchelor, whether it's Dean Hadley, another in the England conversation, he's one that you can really count on for being consistent, can't you, because of that experience.
Without a doubt, he's still got those touches of international quality. And I think you see that, particularly he's got ball in hand, creating opportunities for Tom Davis on that right edge. He struck up a really nice partnership, actually, with Tyrone May as well. The amount of times that you see those two combine, and it's usually a May grubber kick near the line that Hiku is right on the dot to chase through. They've got a nice little pet play there. So yeah, he's still a top quality player. I think I'm right in saying he signed a new 1-year deal as well, so he'll be sticking around next season for KR, and that's a sort of a mark of what they think of him as a player. I think he's not squeaky clean, I don't think, and I think he is a player that, again, Ash Handley's coming up against him, and we talk most weeks about the sort of individual battle Ash Handley will have with his opposite centre.
He's in for another one.
He is, and it'll be really interesting to watch, I think, on that particular side. But up against Tessie New last week for Lee, a couple of times New got the better of him with some footwork. I think made a good break, possibly in the second half. To get round him, just completely did him with a bit of footwork. I think Hickey got back and an ankle tapped him, so did make up for it, but still he's clearly a player that you can get at. Now we know Ash Handley likes to put that little shimmy on and try and get around the edge. He did that successfully against Warrington last week in the build up to set up Brody Cross try. That is again very much Ash Handley's bread and butter, trying to take on his centre around the outside. I think if Leeds can find Handley in some space, I think I'd back him against Hiku to do that. I was thinking even as far back as that fantastic try Leeds scored at Craven Park last season in the win over Hull KR.
Yes.
It was Alfie Edgell that started that move, or I think he got a pass off Lockie Miller to start that move, and it was Hiku that he took on around the outside. Big handoff, got away from him, and again set Leeds free down that left edge. So yes, Hiku is a player that does still have those touches of quality without a doubt, but I do still think defensively, I wouldn't call him a weak spot, but I think he's a player that if you target him enough and you get the right players running towards him and put the right moves on against him, then he is susceptible to a mistake or to be beaten by his opposite number. So I think that is an area that Leeds may well try and target with Ash Handley, knowing what he's like for pace and that nice little, as I say, that nice little shimmy that saw him get the better of the Warrington. I think with Josh Smith, what is it last week?
Yes, Josh Smith
got the better of Josh Smith last week. So don't be surprised if that is an area that Leeds attack, I would say.
Mike Acevo will be getting very happy because as well, but it's the same edge partnership, isn't it? That he scored those miraculous 3 or 4 tries against in Vegas. Not to bring that up again for you Hull KR fans tuning in. Last one, and I've left him until last because I think it's a really interesting dynamic bringing him in as late as they have into the year. You brought him up a little bit earlier in that he is a power prop in to be at Pangai Junior. Very strange the way that he was due to be at Warrington and then that didn't happen. Looked like he was staying in France and now's ended up at Hull KR. And much like Tom Amone coming into Hull KR and letting him go to Cass on loan last year before bringing him in this year, it seems a bit unfair at times that they're able to pick up these big prop forwards that whether it's you go with Sue or Luckley or Whitbread from Wakefield's another example. Like the big bodies, and Pangai Jr. I don't think he's at full match fitness. I don't think he's quite at the rate to go yet. But actually, this is the kind of game where if you have a big lad up against Keenan, up against Mikolaj Ledsky, that'll just help that forward battle. Where if you're looking at it from a Hawkhead perspective, trying to battle what Leeds' pack's going to do, having a big boy out there is not going to be a bad thing to have.
And I think the lack of Sam Luckley this week will provide Pangai Jr. with his biggest challenge to date as part of that Hull KR side. I mean, he's only played 2 games so far, which are those two wins in the last 2 weeks, and he's played a bit of a not so much a cameo role, but he's been off the bench and he's looked fine in the bits they've spelled him in. I think he's one of those players that if you can get him fit and you can get him focused, he can be a real asset. Like you say, it was such an odd situation, wasn't it, signing for Warrington and then not going along. I don't think Catalan's ever saw the best of him either during that spell in the south of France. So, I don't think his ability has ever been in doubt, even when he was over in the NRL. Again, if he was in a position where he was fit and focused, he'd be on most sides' team sheet every week, without a doubt, because that is just the kind of threat that he poses. But I think it's a really interesting move that KR were able to bring him in.
Paid a transfer fee, by the way, as well, to pay to bring him in. So actually, there's some money on the line getting him there. Like,
of course.
They see some value there.
Of course, but on a deal until the end of this season. So maybe that's a bit of an audition. Whether or not there's scope for him to be there longer, moving on to next year and beyond, who knows. But yeah, to bring him in on that short-term deal and just add a bit more oomph to that forward pack, I think was a really interesting move. He's one of those players that can play in the middle or on the edge as a forward as well. He's got good hands, so he's definitely a player that if you can get the best out of him, and that has often been the problem, I think, wherever he's been. If you can get the best out of him, he's absolutely an asset. And as I say, I think there'll be that extra degree of responsibility on him this week, given that Luckley's not there. Whether he'll come on to be that impact prop, we'll wait and see. But this could be his biggest moment or the biggest ask of him so far since he signed for Hull KR.
Do you think they need him? Looking at, take the little Luckley situation out of it, but say you've got a full set of available props, whether it's Sue, not just looking at it this week, but just looking down their list of props. I know that they've got really 3 or 4 top end. So you go, well, whether Sue's available this week, we obviously don't know, but you've got Whitbread's in there. Yes, he provides the experience, but when you've gone out and signed Tom Whitehead from Warrington, you've gone and we spoke about Kobe Winehouse a bit earlier, you've got young lads that are coming through in the position. Do they need him?
It's a good question.
Or is he a bit of a luxury that you might?
I think
he's
he is
available,
that
you might as well have
luxury.
him.
I think he is that luxury, and he almost. I mean, Jack Brown left in to go to Castleford early, and I think
good point.
It's almost a bit of a like for like, is that? But I think with Brown, as much as I do think Jack Brown's a good player, and I think he's a good asset for Castleford. Actually, I think it's a good addition there. He clearly was 5th or 6th choice in that sort of forward pecking order. And for them, when you've got a Dean Hadley again who can drop into the front row, obviously Sue and Amona they're starting to, Whitbread and Luckley are options as well. Then they've got a good sort of mix of Desiree's in the mix as well. They signed him at the start of this season. I think that's what ended up sort of squeezing out Jack Brown. And Tavita Pangai Jr. probably is, as you said, a luxury that if you can get him in, even if it's on a short-term deal, that makes it quite a risk-free move. And if he adds something to you in this running, in this half season that they've given him, then fair play, and it's KR that benefit. If he plays a few games and you think actually maybe he is a bit off the pace and there's other players that we can put in instead, he's on a 1-year deal or half a year deal essentially. You can shake hands at the end of it and say, well, it didn't work out. So I think it's risk free. I think it was worth them doing. I think he's a good asset to them, and certainly on the small showings he's had in those first 2 games, I think it probably will be a positive move. I think if they've got an entire full deck to play with and everyone was fit, I really don't know who you choose, given that Whitbread and Luckley are just such dependable names there. But, I mean, certainly, if there are players that are going to be dropping out, i.e. Luckley's not fit this week, Sue, as we've mentioned, might miss out, to have a player like that there with his experience, and what he really can bring on his day, I think is valuable for KR.
It's quite interesting what it looks like in the Hull KR camp coming into this one. Well, kick-off, we're on a little bit earlier today just because obviously with the reserves game, but kick-off coming up at 8 o'clock. Team news will be dropping at 6:30, so we will see exactly what those matchday squads look like, even though we already know the Leeds. Will it be interesting to see what Hull KR are bringing as they look to bounce back from, like I say, that defeat over in Las Vegas. They will be coming here looking to win their 4th in the last 5 games after beating Leeds in the last 3. Lost last year here at Headingley in a huge game. I remember that. It was a great performance, but coming in with form at that. If you're not here at AMT Headingley or you couldn't get yourself a ticket, well, there's only one way to actually physically watch it live, and that's on Sky Sports. We're on the Action channel this week, so we're actually on a main Sky channel, not on a bonus stream, so you're able to go onto your TV guide, go to Sky Sports Action, and we will be there. For you Super League Plus subscribers, it'll be available about 24 hours after, and for Rhinos TV Plus customers, the full game will be available to you from Monday. So you can watch. If you're out and about, you haven't got a ticket for the game, but you're wanting to keep in touch with exactly what's happening, our great friends at BBC Radio Leeds have full commentary from the game, Jack.
We do, yeah. 7 o'clock is when coverage gets underway. James Dayton and Barry Eaton, your commentary team. That's on all BBC Radio Leeds frequencies and online worldwide as well on BBC Sounds.
There you go. So you could truly take it absolutely anywhere you like, and why you want to keep up to date with exactly what's going on, because it's going to be an absolute cracker, both pre-game, in-game and post-game. Post-game especially, you can keep in touch with us at Leeds Rhinos across X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube to make sure you hear Brad Arthur's post-match comments, all the match highlights from the upcoming week. It's a big week here at the Rhinos. We've got women's action here on Friday as well. That's available for you Rhinos TV Plus customers, plus all the player reaction from the game too. Well, my thanks to Jack Conlon as usual. Great guest, great analysis. Looking up to this one. My name's been Dan Hawkhead, and we will see you next time.